On the line from Lüneburg to Celle, in that moment of dusk when the Lüneburg heath glows once more, I sit at the window and watch the hills pass, those gentle, open hills, everywhere this reddish-brown sand, warm air rising and smelling of dry vegetation, those shrubs burning like small flames in the autumn sun. The window is warm under my hand, and I feel how the train presses the air, how everything opens when the light becomes like this, when it doesn't blaze, but rather caresses. It's late autumn, I think, and somewhere between the twisted pines and the lean grass, the sun still has just enough strength to bathe everything in that warm, fading glow. The pines are twisted, patient trees that make do with little, and even now they have a kind of grace in their profile when the light falls at such an angle. The train moves slowly across a plateau. Ta-dam, ta-dam, and the rhythm adapts to the light, becomes golden and heavy, like that feeling when you know a beautiful moment is about to pass, and you try to hold it by breathing more slowly. A man sits across from me, leaning against the windowsill, and I notice at once that he doesn't belong here, or rather, that he belongs everywhere, but most of all, to moments like this. He wears no thick jacket, just a thin shirt, faded blue, as if the heath itself has wrapped him in its dry warmth, and his skin has that kind of sunburn that no longer burns, but has become golden. His face isn't old, perhaps 65, but it has that sort of brightness that people get who've spent much time in the open air, who've grown up in wind and sun, and for a long time attended only to the colors of things rather than to the words for them. "The heath is most beautiful now," he says, not looking directly at me, more to himself or to the landscape outside, as if the heath itself were listening. When the last light hits it, the kaluna, the heather, it's dark red now, almost violet, almost like blood drying. You know what the light sees in it when it falls so flat on the flowers. It doesn't see only color. It sees time. It sees that it will soon be over. That's why, I think, it becomes so warm. I shake my head, though I might see it myself if I only looked out. But he wants to show me something, to explain something. So I lean back and let him speak. "I live here," he says, "in a small house at the edge of the heath for 35 years, with my wife until a year ago. I ran out every morning, perhaps 2 hours, sometimes 3. Always the same route, a circle my feet have walked for decades, and the feet, they know more than the mind. They know where the stones are, where the soft spot, where the plant holds you, and where it lets you go." He points to a particular light hovering over a distant hill, golden and fragile. "See there? That's where the heath grows most thickly, where the flowers are so close together you can't stand between them. I know every square meter. I know it in every light, every weather, every season." "And what have you learned?" I ask, because I feel there's something he wants to tell me. The man doesn't look away from the window. That beauty doesn't lie in change, but in attention. The heath is always the same shapes, the same form of the hills, the curves, the hollows, the one great tree that rises from the crown of the heath like a thinker. But the light. He breathes out slowly, and I see how his breath fogs the window. the light writes a different story every day. In July, it's bright and hot and boundless, so strong you can't keep your eyes open. In October, like this, so tender and white gold and final. And if you go out every morning for 35 years, you see that. You don't see the heath changing. You see how the light changes it. You learn that the same thing, if you look at it long enough, becomes 1,000 different things. The train rattles on, the wheels working, and I feel the whole weight of the machine traveling through this landscape. Outside, the hills grow broader. The sun falls deeper, turns red, turns orange at the edges. A single bird, a thrush perhaps, but it could be a buzzard, flies over the heath in a high arc, and the man follows it with his eyes, with a tenderness that touches me, as if he watches this small movement every day for decades, knows it by heart, knows this bird must go somewhere. Tomorrow, I'm going to my daughter, he says quietly. So quietly I have to lean forward to hear him. To Hanover. My wife died in spring. For 35 years we made those morning walks together. The last years she was so old too, and I noticed her slowing down, and I went with her. And that was all right. And I don't know if I'll go back. The heath will catch the light without me. It will keep burning in those colors, will turn with the seasons, will draw new people who understand. But I won't run out and see it anymore. I can't do that alone. He says this very calmly, not sadly, but simply stating a fact. Like saying tomorrow morning the sun will rise, that water is cold, that the heath will never move. The train slows. We're approaching Cell, and I feel the old power of the train breaking, looking, arriving. The lights in the compartment begin to glow, first softly, then brighter, and the window becomes a mirror, and I see his face in the glass, contented, thoughtful, at peace with something larger than sorrow, something that feels like acceptance. The rhythm of the train becomes drowsy. Ta-dum, ta-dum, slower, full of weight and patience, and I rest my eyes against the cool pane. The glass is cold, and my breath fogs it, small clouds that disappear again. The last glow of the heath passes by, turns orange, turns red, turns the dark red of the heather he spoke of, and darker still, almost violet, almost black as the light finally goes. And I suddenly understand that he hasn't been telling me about farewell, but something about looking itself, about the way attention transforms you, that a landscape you love, that's not something that changes. That's something that changes you when you look at it. Keep looking at it. That loyalty doesn't lie in the place, but in the gaze. My eyes grow heavy, heavier, and the heath passes by, still warm golden in the last light. And I think of a man who perhaps will never again walk over those hills he knows as well as his own face, like his own heart. But the images of them, those will remain. will stay warm in his memory, will grow light as the light itself. And someday, when he's very old, when he can't walk far anymore, when his legs won't obey, when the loneliness grows too great, he will simply sit and know that everything that needed to happen has already happened, that a life full of attention is never wasted, that the love of a landscape, the deep attention, the loyalty to place and to moment, those are the things that matter. On the route from Rostock to Sassnitz, in the deepest summer, in that one night when the summer was absolutely luminous, I watched a woman who looked out the window the whole way, from beginning to end, unwilling to be distracted, unable to sleep. She was perhaps 65, perhaps older, with wavy hair that was grey-brown, a mixture of age, and her gaze, her whole focus, her whole attention was fixed on the distant coast, on something she was seeking, or which she knew was coming. Mecklenburg-Vorpommern slid past outside the window, flat, with fields and occasionally a village that shimmered in the summer night with a few lights. The summer was still warm, the air warm even at midnight, unusual, and through the open window came the scent of salt and distant water, of something alive, something vast. She barely moved. Her body was motionless, almost rigid, as if the slightest movement would destroy the moment. One hand in her lap, quiet, the other hand against the glass, against the pane, firm but not pressing. Not pressing, simply present, as if sending something wordless into the distance, as if communicating with something only she could see. She wore a thin, faded scarf around her shoulders, light blue, bleached by years, by sun, perhaps by water. And in her face, in every detail, in every line, was a kind of concentration that went beyond mere attention. That was a kind of meditation, a kind of prayer. I wasn't alone in the compartment with her. There were other people, other passengers, other lives, but it felt absolutely as if everyone else wasn't there, as if they didn't exist. She needed this moment completely alone, needed this emptiness around her, needed the light that came from the other side, from the coast. And then I saw what she saw. I saw it in her face first, saw the change, saw that she'd recognized the light. The lights on the horizon. A single light first, perhaps a lighthouse, or a house right at the edge of the world, right at the edge of the horizon where the earth meets the sea. But it wasn't strong. It was faint, almost tired, like when a person at the end of a long day lifts their hand and makes a small, quiet gesture, a wave that barely has strength left. The light said, I didn't hear it with my ears, but I understood, I'm still here. I'm still there. I haven't gone. And it didn't flicker, not uncertainly. It was steady, constant, reliable, a promise that's kept every night. And I saw how the woman moved, barely perceptible, almost imperceptible. Her whole body changed, relaxed. Her breath became deeper, longer, slower, as if she was finally allowed to breathe properly again. She recognized this light. She knew it from somewhere, from another time, from another life almost. A home, perhaps, a place where she'd grown up, where she was happy. Or a sorrow, a place of grief, a place of significance. Or just the memory, just the echo of a memory, of a time when everything was simpler and the lights shone more clearly, when the world still had colors. Her lips moved slowly, as if she were murmuring something, as if speaking to someone. But no words came from her mouth, no audible words. Just a sigh, deep and long, like when you let go of something you've carried for so long, like when you're finally allowed to set down a burden. The train moved slower, deliberately, intentionally, or perhaps only as it felt, as it was real to my perception. As if it were respecting the silence, as if it knew, intuitively knew, deep down, that this moment was sacred, that something important was happening here, that a moment of transformation was taking place. And the lights didn't grow brighter, didn't intensify in their strength, didn't grow stronger, but they became clearer, sharper in my perception, as if one becomes ever more aware of oneself the closer one approaches the truth, the closer one comes to one's destination, the closer one comes to the core of life. The woman leaned forward, slowly, carefully, almost deliberately, her head nearly against the pane, her forehead nearly touching the cold glass, and her gaze followed every flicker of the light, every glimmer, every moment of presence, every small pulse of the light, as if the light were singing to her, singing a song that only she could hear, a song in a frequency that only her soul knew. I wondered, as I watched her with new attention, when she'd last seen that light. Years ago? Decades ago? In her youth? In a time before lives shifted, before continents drifted apart, before war tore the world apart? Or had she only seen it in dreams, only in her imagination, only in the nights when she slept alone? And now, in this moment, her heart suddenly recognized that it was real, that it existed, that it wasn't just a phantom of her memory, not just a hallucination of age. The woman murmured something under her breath, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Just vibrations, just tones, sound without words. A name, perhaps. A name she'd thought was lost. A place, a person, a life that had vanished. Or a prayer, to the light, to God, to the past. Or just the song of someone coming home, of someone trying to remember, who hopes that the memory is true, that time hasn't destroyed everything, that something lasts. The train rolled on, ever onward, northward to that distant island, ever closer with every kilometer. And the lights grew brighter, nearer, clearer with every minute, with every rattle of the wheels, with every heartbeat. And the woman, this one woman with the faded scarf, remained motionless, completely motionless. Her hand on the glass, her eyes fixed on that one small, steady light, completely focused, single-minded, as if nothing else existed, as if the world had concentrated itself on this one point. It was as if the light were drawing her, magnetically, irresistibly, calling her home, calling her with a voice only she could hear, visible only to her. Not a physical home, no, not a place with streets and houses and neighbors, but a home that lives in the soul, deep within, that exists in the deepest memory, in the layers of life and time. The light that shows us that we were never completely lost, not entirely lost, that there is a place, perhaps only in ourselves, perhaps also outside, that awaits our return, that waits for us patiently, like a friend waits for someone they love. And I understood in that moment, in that profound, clear second, that we all have such lights, each of us. Lights that call to us from afar, from the distance, from the darkness. Lights that say, "You belong here. You're not lost, not really. I'm here, and I wait for you. Come home." And most people, perhaps most of us, spend their whole lives ignoring these lights, suppressing them, pretending the light isn't calling. But some follow them despite everything, follow them across trains and seas and all the years, across all distance, all time, all change. And my eyes grew heavy with the sight, heavy with the beauty, with the deep significance of a soul that searches for home, that searches for homeland, that searches for the light that calls to it. And the light waited, patiently, without impatience, tirelessly, on the horizon, shining, waiting. And I drifted away, slowly, into sleep, where all lights came together, where all homes came together, and everything became warm, became home, became complete. In autumn, travelling from Emden to Noordijk along the line to the sea, I met a widow who was travelling alone for the first time in 50 years, completely alone. She was a small woman, compact somehow, as if the years, all of them, all those decades, had compressed her from the ground up, made her into something concentrated, something distilled. And her eyes, I couldn't stop watching them. They were the color of sea ice, that cold, crystalline ice you see glinting in the sun. Cold and transparent on the surface, but with deeper layers beneath. Stories layered underneath, a life layered underneath. She wore a scarf, grey, worn thin, that smelt of salt and something else, something I couldn't quite place at first. Something I could smell, but couldn't name. Grief, perhaps, or freedom, or both together, mixed the way salt and water are mixed. And her hands were what you noticed first, what told the whole story. They were cracked and split from a lifetime of work at the water, from salt spray, from cold, from labor. They were hands that knew, absolutely knew, how to work. Hands that had never learnt gentleness, but also never knew fear, never shied away from hard work. Her husband had been a fisherman. That was his life, his whole identity. Not professionally in some detached way, no, though the money came from it too, but truly, really, it was his life, his breath, his heartbeat, his reason for existing. Every morning before dawn, in the darkness, out into the North Sea, that cold, merciless North Sea, with his nets and his hope and his fear. The North Sea was cruel, she said to me, and her voice held no bitterness. It took so much, men, time, hopes, and gave nothing back sometimes, nothing but took and took. And yet he loved it, loved the North Sea, always came back to it. It wasn't a rational love, not something you could explain with your head. It was almost like slavery, a dependency, a compulsion. But he wouldn't break it, didn't want to be free. And she the widow. She'd always been there, waiting, mending, preserving, selling what he brought home, keeping the boats ready, keeping him ready, cooking what he needed and what he'd brought from the sea. And then he died. Suddenly, unexpectedly, or perhaps not unexpected at all. Perhaps it was always clear this would come. Not dramatic, no. Not with pain, not with final words. Just too old, too tired, too burnt out. His heart said, "Enough. I can't go on." That was all. And the widow was alone in a house by the sea. A big house, a house built for two people, not for one, with a fisherman's tools on the walls, with the nets, with the photographs, with the memories. And a life that had to become something new, without being asked, without consent, without preparation. She told me, and her voice was steady, not emotional, just factual, that she'd never traveled alone. He'd always been there, always physically present, loud, alive, with big gestures and a voice made rough by salt and years, almost cracking with age. And now the voice was gone, died with him. But the home felt like a place where his voice still echoed loud, where the echoes still lived, still moved like the wind. She saw him everywhere, in the fish baskets by the window that he'd made, in the old sea charts on the wall that he'd used, in the silence of the rooms, in the absence of movement. So she got on this train, this northern line to the coasts he'd loved, that loved him in their way. To... She searched for the word, and her eyes grew wet. Not from crying, but from effort, from trying to say something that couldn't be said. "To say goodbye," she said finally, the words coming slowly. "My husband loved the sea. Well, that's not quite right. He loved it, and he feared it. But he feared it more than he loved it, if I'm honest, now that I can think about it without him there to contradict me. The sea was always his adversary, a kind of beloved adversary, you might say. He fought the waves every single time with all his strength, all his courage. And sometimes the wave won, took a net from him, took a day's catch. And sometimes he won, brought a good harvest back. It was an old game between them, like a dance between two dancers who love and hate each other all at once, who never quite know who'll lead, who'll step first. And she'd decided, sometime on a long night alone in that house, she'd travel to Noorddijk, sit down by the harbour, by the water, and let the sea be for him. Let the waves roll for him, dance for him. Let the fish swim for him. Let the salt sting for him, teach him. And then she could go on living, and the sea could keep going, could keep dancing, and she wouldn't feel guilty for being alive, wouldn't feel guilty for breathing someone else's air, for hearing a different voice. I asked her, carefully, gently, if she was afraid of the sea. She laughed, a short, hard laugh, but without any bitterness behind it. Afraid of the sea? No. I've been at the harbour every day for 17 years, every single day, in wind and rain. The sea is my neighbour, more familiar than most people. The sea gave me a husband, gave me 50 years with him, gave me a life that meant something. The sea didn't take him from me, not really. Time did that. Age. A heart that grew too tired. The sea was just the place, the stage, where time lived, where love lived, or the absence of love, where life happened. She looked out at the landscape now turning towards the sea, the color growing grayer, the air beginning to smell of salt. I'm not here to say goodbye to him. I'm not here to perform some ritual. I'm here because I don't know how to live without him, how to breathe without him. And the sea knows how to live with absence. The sea lives with tide and ebb, with giving and taking, with presence and emptiness together. Perhaps the sea has lessons to teach me. The train was drawing near to Noorddijk. The landscape became more familiar. The air shifted. The quality of light changed. And the woman turned to the window, leant forward, and her gaze wasn't really on the landscape, but on something beyond it, something that went past the land, on the sea, perhaps, or on a man who was still there, always still there, in the water, in the waves, in the work, in the memory. And I saw her hands relax, those hard, working fisherman's hands. Saw her breathing deepen, lengthen. Saw her preparing herself inside for a reunion with something she'd always feared, but also always loved. A fear-love that was bound so tightly together you couldn't separate the two. And slowly, as slowly as the waves themselves flow and return, without any hurry, the rattle of the wheels began to sound like the sound of the sea to me, became one with it, merged with it. The rhythm became the same, the rattle, the whisper of water, the breathing, all became one. And I drifted down into the deep feeling that we're all fishermen, every one of us, on our own sea of life, gathering what comes, the good catches and the bad, giving thanks for them, letting them go, and waiting patiently for the next tide, the next chance, the next possibility. In spring. That was an odd time to be traveling, when the seasons were still uncertain, when the fog sat in the Alps like a ghost that wouldn't leave, a phantom, an intruder that couldn't accept the winter was finished. There was a man sitting across from me on the line from Oberstdorf to Sonthofen. A man I couldn't quite see properly at first glance. He wore an old cape, a gray, tattered thing, almost in shreds, worn cloth that the mountain hunters used to wear in older times. And underneath was almost nothing visible except occasionally a dark shirt, gray fabric. Only his face was visible, unmasked, a face that looked as though it had existed long before I was born, as if time had carved it with deep furrows the way a river carves stone, slowly but relentlessly, each year marking another line deeper. His eyes were the color of a mountain lake, blue-gray, opaque, unfathomable, with a depth that no measuring line could ever reach, a depth that was somehow bodiless, that existed beyond the physical. We barely spoke. There was nothing to say, or perhaps there was too much to say, and it was too complicated for words. It was the kind of compartment where silence isn't rude, but necessary, where it's a genuine need, where words would only spoil it. A silence that's part of the journey, just like the rattle of the wheels or the curves of the line, like the braking at stations. The man looked out the window at the fog, perfectly still, attentive,
I looked out the other window at the same fog, the same gray wall. Different perspectives on the same emptiness, the same mystery. And the fog seemed to look back at us both, to see through us, to watch us almost, gray and impenetrable, a wall of nothing almost, a wall of possibilities. It was as if the world was on the edge of being created and still didn't know what shape it should take, as if the world was in a moment of indecision, a moment of transition. The train climbed higher into the mountains, drew itself up into the heights, and the fogs grew thicker, not thinner, more opaque, whiter, more impenetrable with every meter of altitude. It was as if the world was withdrawing into itself, as if it was hiding from us, protecting itself from our gaze, from our questions.
And then, not because he'd planned it, not because he meant to speak, but because the time was right, because the moment was right, because the words spoke themselves, he said very quietly, very carefully, barely audible above the continuous rattle of the train, the way you speak to someone sleeping and you don't want to wake them, don't want to disturb their peace. The fog is a good friend. That was all. Just that one sentence, that one thought, that one truth that said everything. And I understood immediately, with perfect clarity, that he wasn't speaking about the fog outside, the gray, physical veil pressing against the window, hiding the mountains, erasing the world. No, he wasn't speaking of the outer fog. He was speaking of the fog within. The inner fog, inside oneself, the fog that lives in all of us. The fog where you can't see clearly, where you don't know for certain, where you can't plan perfectly. The fog, that dark fog, where you simply exist, simply wait patiently, simply breathe, until the light comes again, until clarity returns, until the truth reveals itself. It was an absolution of sorts, somehow, an almost forgiveness, a gift. Permission not to understand, not to know everything. Permission not to know, not to be able to see. Permission to be uncertain, not to have all the answers. And the man, this old man with his cape, he kept his cape on, sat motionless, somehow warm despite the cold outside, watching, completely present, completely there in a way I couldn't quite understand. And I watched back, watched him, watched everything. Not just him, not his movements or his appearance, but the space between us, the space the fog filled, the space the fog held like a mother holds a child, the space that held the mountains without speaking, without words, without demands. The fog didn't speak. It was silent, hovering, existing. But it held and preserved everything like a secret, like something sacred, like a prayer. And it was as if the whole world consisted of this silence, this complete, absolute, perfect absence of demand, of haste, of purpose, of destiny, of time pressure. The train was a space outside of time, almost outside the normal world, a space where only presence mattered, a place of true peace. The fog was our teacher, our master, our spiritual guide, and we were apprentices to it, or it was apprenticing us, in patience, in silence, in accepting darkness, in trusting what we couldn't see. There was no arrival, no destination, no goal that mattered, no final station, no formal goodbye, no see you again words. The man and I, two completely different people on a train, two souls that had found each other in the fog. We were two people on a train, wrapped in fog, completely alone. Just two, just a man and myself. And yet not lonely, not isolated. And that was enough. More than enough. It was perfect, complete, whole. We didn't need to talk, didn't need to know, didn't need to understand everything, didn't need to express it all in words. We needed only to be there, present, completely there, breathing, existing together. The fog was our teacher, our master, our spiritual elder almost, and we were good students, attentive, reverent, humble. The train carried us on, ever on, into this fog, through these mountains, and I understood, truly understood, in my deepest core, that not everything in life demands clarity. Sometimes the fog is the answer. Sometimes not knowing is the truth. Sometimes the darkness is the light we needed. And we traveled on, ever southward, down into the valleys. The mountains grew smaller. The fog began to clear somewhat. The man and I, two people on a train, two souls that understood each other without words, in silence, in fog, in a stillness so vast, so encompassing, so deep that it almost became a song, a hymn of silence, a symphony of quiet. The train rolled on, unstoppable. The rattle of the wheels became the heartbeat of the world, the pulse of everything that lives and breathes. And the fog surrounded us like a protective blanket, soft, somehow warm, like a refuge, like a safe home, like a secret you share. And slowly, very slowly, the mountains disappeared entirely behind the wall of grey, completely gone, utterly gone. And there was only fog and warmth and the certainty, the deep, unshakable certainty that everything that hurts, everything that matters, was waiting on the other side, waiting with infinite patience, patient, without impatience, until I was ready, until I'd understood, until I'd accepted that not everything needs to be clear. In the deepest winter, the time when cold creeps into your bones, when the air becomes sharp, on the line from Weimar to Jena, a woman stepped into my compartment, and the first thing I saw was the cello case. A large black case, bigger than an ordinary guitar, older than the woman carrying it, older than she ever would be, perhaps older than the two of them together. She was middle-aged, perhaps 50, perhaps 60, hard to say, with a face that said clearly, "I've lived a great deal, but not everything. There are still undiscovered countries in my life." The cello case was black, deep black, elegant, worn but well kept, with a white label, a yellowed label, bearing a name in slanted letters, Amati, 1780. Not possible, of course. An Amati from 1780. The thing could be worth hundreds of thousands. But on these trains, in these nights, you simply believe everything you see. Everything is possible. Everything is real. She sat down slowly, carefully, beside the window, not facing it, but positioned so she could watch the case. And the cello case lay on her lap like a precious child, like something that must be protected. She didn't look inside, perhaps wasn't allowed to look, but her hands held it firmly, held it securely, not from nervous fear, but from genuine respect, from reverence almost,
She looked regularly, every few minutes, a quick check, a glance as if to confirm the instrument was still breathing, still alive, whether the crack in the wood hadn't grown larger while she wasn't looking. And I understood immediately, instinctively. This wasn't a cello you played, that you used, that you performed with. This was a cello you carried like a sacred relic, that you cared for like a patient, a cello that had a life, that was older, that was far older than this woman's life, that carried history, that carried decades of music. She noticed my gaze, my fixation on the case, and smiled with a kind of wistfulness, with a kind of understanding that told me she'd answered this question, this silent question, 100 times before, that people always want to understand, are always curious. She said slowly, "I'm not the owner, I'm only the carrier, the servant of this instrument." And then she told me with a care, with a love that touched me deeply. The cello belongs to the Music Academy in Jena, not to her personally, but to the Academy, to the public, to music itself, to humanity almost. An instrument that's already been played in many, many concert halls, perhaps 100, 200 concerts, has already heard hundreds or thousands of notes, has already brought tears to many people, given hope to many in dark times. An instrument with a long, rich genealogy of sounds, of music, of human emotion. And now it needed a repair. A fine crack in the wood, a small wound, nothing large, but it needs healing, in Weimar, by a master, one of these great masters of the old craft, who was already 88, and soon wouldn't be able to work. Soon the mastery would be lost. So it had to be quick. So she traveled herself with it, with the case, with this precious thing, rather than entrust it to an anonymous courier who wouldn't understand what was inside. The woman herself, she'd played cello once, many years ago. Professionally, she said with a voice free of sorrow, free of bitterness. A beautiful career, an international career. Small orchestras in Eastern Europe, a few concert tours, even a radio recording. Her voice sent out on the airwaves, heard by people she'd never meet. A lifetime of music, a lifetime of dialogue with this magical instrument, with the cello. She and the instrument were one, were partners. But at some point, it's hard to say exactly when, at some point she stopped. Not because of an injury. Her hands were still strong, still capable, still beautiful somehow. And not because of age, not because of physical decline. Simply because the music stopped speaking to her. The notes became signs on paper, just symbols, not music anymore. The instrument became a burden, became work, something she had to do rather than something she wanted to love. And she couldn't go on with deafness. Couldn't pretend she still heard the music, couldn't lie when there was only silence, when the song didn't come when she played. But the Academy, she still knew them. Someone there, someone who loved music, someone who remembered her recordings, her deep interpretation, remembered her recordings, her career. A professor there, an old man probably too, who remembered her recordings as if they were made yesterday, sought her out somehow, found her somewhere in the country. And he asked her, hesitantly perhaps, respectfully, with reverence, whether she could transport this case, this precious case that was hundreds of years old, for repair to that one master. For a small payment, yes, but actually, said the professor seriously, we don't want to entrust this precious thing to an anonymous courier, not to a stranger. The instrument needed hands, specifically understanding hands. Hands that would see the cello not as a package, not as an object, but as a life, as a being, as something with a soul. And the woman said yes, though it was painful, though it broke her heart, though the task seemed impossible, said yes. Because sometimes, she said later, quietly, it's easier to care for music when you can no longer play it, when you can no longer speak through playing. You can separate care from playing. You can love without the love coming back, can give, can support, without expecting to receive something, without expecting to experience something.
And the train traveled on through the white winter landscape. Fields completely white, trees covered in heavy, beautiful snow. A wintry dream picture, a postcard from another time. And the woman held the cello case firmly, but not tensely, not in fear, not sternly or defensively. Rather like when you hold the warm, living flesh of an animal you love, that you want to protect, that you want to preserve. Tenderly, respectfully, with complete, deep understanding of the life within, of the music that sleeps within, that waits within. And I asked her, carefully, quietly, knowing that this was a great question, that perhaps this was a question that shouldn't be asked. Do you regret it? Do you regret that you stopped playing? And she didn't answer right away. Thought for a long time, silently, thoughtfully. She looked out the window at the snow-covered fields, at the still, white, peaceful world. And then she said, very quietly, with a voice barely audible, "No, I don't regret stopping. But sometimes, when I hear a cello being played, on the radio while I'm cooking, in a cafe where I unexpectedly sit, then I realize I don't regret stopping. I only regret that I stopped grieving, that I stopped feeling pain. That was wrong." And slowly as snow falls from the sky, so soundlessly, so gently, I understood something deep, something I'd always known, but never spoken aloud. That some people can't give up music. Not really. Not ever. They only give up the illusion that they could. That music is something you can set down like you set down a coat, like you take off a hat. The cello, this instrument, this music, this love, will always still play in their bones, will always vibrate deep inside, will always sing quietly until the end of time, until rest at the end, until peace. And she, the woman with the case, she would always be an instrument, would always remain an instrument, even if she never lifted a bow again, even if she never played again with her own hands. Slowly, silently, in the notes that play within, in the music that lives in her veins, in her blood, in her soul, forever, until eternity. The sound of rain on the roof of the train, on the metal roof, has a rhythm today, a pulse that I know well, that I know from my own life. Ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. And this rhythm, this simple, repeated sound, brings me a memory, draws it up from the depths. It's autumn,
Not this autumn, but an autumn many years ago, and we're traveling from Prague to Pilsen, and outside cold rain is falling on old cobblestones, on stones that still date from a time before the wars emptied the city, before destruction came. The rain was different then, more intense, angrier, as if the sky itself was weeping, as if the universe was grieving. I'm sitting alone in the compartment. This was many, many years ago, perhaps 40 years, and my wife was still alive, still young almost. But she was sitting in another compartment, further back in the train, with girlfriends, with people I didn't know. Because she said, with a voice I understand better now than I did then, that she needed a little time for herself too, that she couldn't always be beside me. That was the first time she said it, that she separated herself, that she needed distance. And it hurt more than I could show, was a pain that went deep. So I sit here, alone, and I hear this rain on the roof, and a memory comes to mind of another rain, even much older, even much earlier in my life, so old that I can barely think this moment was ever real, so long ago, so much in the past somehow. I was 19 years old. 19. Young, naive, desperately in love, deeply in love. Unhappy in the particularly painful way you're unhappy when you're too young, too early, far too early, realize that the world won't be simple, that life won't be what you hope, that dreams will shatter. And I stood under a stone archway in Prague, an old stone archway, part of a medieval house, part of history, and I was waiting for a woman. Not my present wife, not my spouse, a different woman entirely, a different person. One who told me, with eyes that weren't sure, with a voice that wavered, with words that were uncertain, that she might come if she could, if it didn't rain, if her father allowed it, if the sky was clear, if. An answer that was already no, that was already silent refusal. And then, and it happened, it rained. The rain came like a judge comes to court, relentless, and spoke its verdict, final, unappealable, immovable. She wouldn't come. She would not come. I would remain here, alone, soaked through to the skin, hopeless and hurting, while time passed by, while hours slipped away like water. And I stood there, under the archway, wet, trembling, but not from the rain alone, trembling from grief, from disappointment, from pain. And it was the first time I truly understood, a moment of clarity in the darkness. The rain is neutral. It takes no side. It falls on everyone the same, on the happy and the sad, on the hopeful and the desperate. It forgives nothing, condemns nothing. It simply falls, and then it's gone. The sadness, I said to myself back then. I was only 19, but I already understood so much. The sadness, that's in me, not in the rain. The rain is just rain. It's only water falling from the sky. And the longer I stood under it, the more the rain soaked through me, the more I slowly understood that the world wasn't guilty for my pain. The world owed me nothing. The rain wasn't evil. It was simply rain. The woman wasn't evil. She couldn't come. The love was simply too young, too weak, too unbalanced to fight against reality, against the facticity of things. And many years went by, decades went by, quickly almost, the way years do. And I married the other woman.
The woman who, back then, on this train journey, said she needed time for herself. The woman who now sits in another compartment in this same train and laughs with her girlfriends, laughing without burden. And we grow old together, slowly, year by year, wrinkle by wrinkle, memory by memory. And it is not dramatic, not full of grand, epic moments. It is quiet. It is secure. It is stable. It is a life, a real life. And sometimes, especially when I hear rain, when I hear this sound of rain on a metal roof, I wish I could tell that 19-year-old boy, that young, wounded, hopeful man who stood under an archway in Prague and waited. It will get better. It won't be perfect. It will never be what you expect. But it will get better. It will deepen. It will become more real. It will be a life with real meaning. And the love that didn't come, the love that left you standing in the rain, that wasn't a punishment. It was a teacher. It was a lesson. And when I hear this rain today, this simple, ordinary rain on the roof of the train, I finally understand. I truly understand. I understand deeply that the first unhappiness was necessary, absolutely necessary, so that I could recognize the second happiness, could appreciate it, could be grateful for it. The train travels on through the Bohemian night, through the old landscape where it all began, in that city, under that archway. The rain falls and falls, falls continuously, evenly, without anger now, without drama or fury. The cobblestones drink, draw in the water, without complaining, without protesting against the wetness. They accept what comes. They accept. The earth, this old, patient earth, accepts. Everything accepts. Everything acquiesces. And I am so tired, so profoundly tired of life, of all the years of running, of rushing, of flying, all the years of waiting for the right thing, for the perfect thing, all the years of hoping, of searching, of wanting more. I'm tired of bearing the burdens, the expectations, the dreams. And now it's time, finally, just to sit very quietly, and to hear how the rain falls on the metal roof of the train, how the continuous rattle of the wheels dances together with the rain, how they create a rhythm, united. And to understand, finally, to truly understand, in every cell of my body, that everything that was bitter, it needed to be, was absolutely necessary so that it could become sweet. The roses would never have been so red, so alive, so precious, had I not felt the thorn when I touched them, had I not bled. The love would never have been so sweet, so precious, so real, had I not felt the rejection, had I not stood alone under an archway in Prague. And my eyes grow heavy, heavier with each moment, and the voice of the rain becomes the voice of an angel, becomes the voice of my own deepest, true wisdom, that tells me, finally, everything that was necessary. Everything that was right. Everything that is enough.
I am enough. Everything is enough. And everything that comes, ta-dum, 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 slowly, deeper, warmer, peaceful, with every beat of the heart and the wheels united together in this one precious night. I met the basket weaver on the line from Donauwörth to Ingolstadt, a line that follows the Danube, follows a river, on one of those perfect summer evenings where the heat of the day slowly, imperceptibly, fades into the cool of the night, where summer begins to sleep. He was old, truly old, really old, at least late 80s, perhaps 90, and yet he was working on a basket, working with complete concentration while the train rolled beneath him. His fingers, thin, bony fingers, were so fast, so precise, so sure, that it looked as though the basket was weaving itself, as if it was making itself, as if the willow itself knew what it should do. The material in his hands was willow, true willow from the banks of the Danube, which this train followed, accompanied for a stretch while the man worked. The man told me, with a voice that was dry, rough with age, but full of knowledge, that he selected the willows with great care, that he knew, truly knew, which branches were long enough, which were flexible enough without breaking, which were the right age, which still had life in them. It wasn't knowledge he'd learnt at some point, not from books, not from a master. It was knowledge that lived in his bones, that flowed in his blood, that lived in his hands themselves, that lived in his body the way breathing does. 70 years, 70 long, long years, he'd worked with willows, lived with them. 70 years. And in that time, he'd woven perhaps thousands and thousands of baskets. But each was different, each was new, each was unique. "The willow tells me what shape it wants to take," he said with great seriousness, as if he were sharing a secret, as if he were speaking something sacred. And he didn't work quickly, not from impatience or haste or restlessness. He worked rhythmically, almost meditatively, the way a heart beats, reliably, constantly, the way a river flows, freely but with direction. One willow here, one there, under, over, firm, loose, strong, flexible, always at the right moment, always with the right pressure, always right. And I saw, watched with new attention, that he didn't really look at his basket, not with his eyes, didn't stare at it. He looked out the window, at the Danube flowing beside the train, parallel to him, as if two things were traveling the same stretch, two things that knew the same rhythm, that understood each other. And his hands, his working hands, they were looking too. They were seeing. Hands have eyes, I thought, a new insight. These hands see better than my eyes. These hands know more than my brain. I asked him, carefully, because I wasn't sure I should break his concentration, "Do you think about the basket while you're weaving it? Do you plan? Do you overthink?" And he laughed, not loudly, not rudely, but a gentle laugh, a laugh that expressed understanding for the question. A long laugh, kind, almost patient. Think? No, no. The basket and I, we don't speak. We don't have a conversation. The basket and I, we dance together. And when you dance properly, really dance, you don't think, you feel. And I watched, observed carefully how his hands moved, how they knew, intuitively knew, when to be firm, when to give way, when to apply pressure, when to relax. And the willow, it understood him, understood the intention behind his movements. It flowed with his wishes, with his prayers almost. And the train rolled on, and the Danube flowed parallel, and the basket became complete. Complete the way a flower becomes complete, the way a tree becomes complete. Simply so, without drama, without surprise. The way something that should be, that was destined to be, simply starts to be, simply exists. And then the basket was finished. Suddenly or slowly, it was hard to say. Not because time determined it, not because a clock hand said now, but because the willow determined it, because the dialogue was complete. The man made one final knot, a knot you didn't see, almost invisible, hidden under the rim of the basket. A knot just for him, just for the willow, just for the truth between them, for the communication that happened between man and material. The old man, with his whole body, placed the basket on his lap and regarded it for a long time, for minutes. Not with the gaze of an inspector, not critically, not checking, no. With love, with genuine feeling, with the feeling of a father looking at his child and thinking, not with words, but with his heart. Yes, that's right. That's exactly how it should be, how it had to be, how the Danube would know it should be. And I saw, observed carefully, that the basket wasn't perfect, not in the sense of flawless. There was a small irregularity, a slight unevenness, where the willow was a bit thinner, where the tension was different, where you could almost see a gap if you looked closely. But the irregularity wasn't a fault, wasn't something that needed repairing. It was the man's signature, his name written in willow, the secret between him and the willow, the visible, tangible proof that a person was here, that here life and work and dialogue happened, that here two things worked together with one another. And the train pulled into Ingolstadt, slowly, braked, came to a stop, and the man, this old, wise man, stood up, upright, dignified. He had no luggage except this one basket, no suitcase, no bags, nothing. Just the basket he'd just woven, just completed. And he stepped out, dignified, carefully, these old limbs that were still stable, still worked. And I watched him stand on the platform, alone, and look around slowly, as if to see whether someone was expecting him, whether someone was waiting for him. And I don't know, couldn't see whether anyone was there in the shadow. But it didn't matter, really, it truly didn't. The basket was there. The work was finished. The dancers were finished with each other. Until next time. Until the next dance. And I sat alone in the compartment. Completely alone now. Just me and the empty place where the old man sat. And the train started again, rolled on southward. And my breath grew heavy, deep breaths from the beauty, from the profound beauty of a whole life spent in willow weaving, lived in willow. 70 years of rhythm, continuous rhythm, of dancing, of dialogue, of willows that understand and hands that know, without thinking. and I drifted off slowly, drifted peacefully into a sleep where everything was weaving, where everything was interwoven. Thoughts weave together, dreams weave together, and there's no clear beginning and no clear end, just slowly, the gentle movement, the meditative movement of something that makes itself, that weaves itself, that completes itself. On the line from Zurich to Bern, scenically one of the most beautiful lines with mountains and valleys, I met a mother who was writing in a notebook, writing with passion, writing like someone who can't stop. She was writing while the landscape flowed past, while Switzerland flowed past. She wasn't young, perhaps mid-50s, perhaps older, hard to say. But in the way she sat, upright, focused, in the way she held her pens, with genuine feeling, there was something of a student, something young, something that hadn't yet been used up, hadn't yet been worn out. The notebook she held was thick, very thick, filled with hundreds of pages, filled with handwriting, thoughts, perhaps prayers. And she was beginning a new page, a new chapter of her life perhaps, with the heading in large letters, "What I couldn't tell the children." She wrote quickly, not from nervous haste or inner unrest, but from necessity, from genuine need, as if the pen was a valve, and if she didn't write, something inside her would explode, would build up inner pressure, would feel like emotions overflowing. The words came so quickly, pressed so urgently, that sometimes she couldn't read her own handwriting, that she couldn't write fast enough, that she wrote beyond the edge of the page, that words overlapped, thoughts were jumbled. But that didn't matter at all. This wasn't meant to be calligraphic, not beautiful, not for an audience. The writing wasn't for others, not for her children, not for her husband, not for the world. This was for herself, for her soul, a confession in the darkness, therapy without a therapist, a form of love, belated love, love that came too late, that she couldn't express any other way. I didn't ask her directly. I had no right to ask. But she told me anyway, without my asking. The way people sometimes tell a stranger what they can't tell the people close to them, because the closeness is too great, because the emotional intimacy makes it impossible, because love gets in the way, or because time was too short, or because the words were too large for the moment. She said slowly, 3 children, 3 living people who came from my body. 2 are adults now, 36 and 34, with their own lives, their own problems. 1 is still a teenager, 17, still too young, still too close. And I love them all, love them really, love them more than I loved my own existence, my own life. But there's so much I couldn't say while I was raising them, while the years slipped by. So much that I deliberately hid, that I kept silent from fear, that I repressed because it hurt. Too much repressed, feelings too complicated, too painful for words. And now the active time is over. They're grown, they don't need me anymore. And I can't get it back, can't turn back time. The window is closed. The opportunity is gone. She wrote on, pen against paper, again and again. And I saw sentences, just fragments, pieces of a larger whole. I should have told you that fear is normal, that it's okay to be afraid. I shouldn't have shouted if I'd known. The tears I shed, that you saw, they weren't because of you. Not because of you, but because of me. I'm sorry I didn't teach you everything. And I understood, truly understood, that this notebook was a letter, not a diary, but a letter to people who would never read it. A letter from a woman, a mother, to the versions of her children that had vanished, that grew up, while she herself, the mother, didn't change, stood still in time.
She told me, as she wrote, that she was taking this journey deliberately alone, that she'd told her children she was going to a seminar in Bern, that she needed time for herself, that it was a weekend away. That was true, technically true, but it wasn't the whole truth, not the deeper truth. She said she was attending a seminar in Bern about parenting, about letting go, about accepting one's own mistakes, about forgiveness. A whole weekend, 3 days with other mothers, other women carrying similar burdens, with therapists, with workbooks and intense discussions. But she also said, cautiously, I don't know if it will help. I don't know if there are words for what I feel, for the shame and love all mixed together. Perhaps this notebook is all there is, all that remains. These words, written down on a train journey, on this line. These words that don't really reach anyone, because the people who should read them, the real addressees, they probably never will. They can't read them. But they're true anyway. They're necessary. And I needed them to be true, to exist, to be written on paper, real, not just thoughts in my head. And that was the beautiful thing, the moment I didn't expect. Then I said, and I don't know why I said it. It came from a place deeper than thinking. But you will read it. And she looked up. The pen stopped, and her eyes were wet, tears she hadn't expected. Me? She said, almost disbelieving. Yes, I said slowly. You're also someone's child, aren't you? You had a mother too. And the word mother, the word grandmother, stood between us, unspoken but present, vibrating almost. And I said, perhaps these words aren't directly for your children, that's right. But perhaps they're for the mother who raised you, who brought you up, who made her own mistakes. And in the moment when you write these words, when you write down pain, write down love, write down forgiveness, in that moment, you're loving her in a way that perhaps comes too late for the deepest change, but is also just right, right now when you understand. And the woman didn't write anymore. The pen lay still. She just sat there, the notebook open on her lap, but not writing, her hand at rest. And the train traveled on through the Swiss landscape, through the beautiful Swiss landscape, through valleys and bridges over rivers. And the woman stared out, not unfocused, but very present. And I saw how something in her shifted, rearranged itself somehow. Not solved completely, not healed, but moved, reordered. Like when you shift a heavy stone from one shoulder to the other, the burden remains, but the distribution changes, becomes more bearable. And when the train pulled into Bern, finally, after the long journey, she stood up, stood slowly, took the thick notebook, held it against her body, and said quietly, "Thank you. Thank you very much." And I said nothing back, because there was nothing left to say, because everything important had already been said. The notebook had said it all. The journey had said it all. And she went, the mother and her words, her thick, filled-in words, into a new city, Bern, to learn there, to get tools there, perhaps to be able to let go, to be able to forgive. And I sat alone in the compartment and understood, truly understood, that all of us carry an invisible notebook, must carry one, filled with things we couldn't say, weren't allowed to say, didn't want to say. And the writing is the way, the manner to forgive. Not forgiveness itself, but the path to it. Slowly, page by page, word by word, until the train stops rolling and all that's left is silence and the deep feeling that it's enough, that everything is enough, that the love is enough. On the line from Krakow to Rzeszów, on one of those Polish trains where the windows are small and the light falls differently, somehow greener, more damp. I sit beside an older woman who has a large basket on her lap, and from the basket comes a smell that transports me instantly. Earth, onion, the green herbs of an earlier time. She wears a headscarf, not from today, but also not from 100 years ago. Sometime in between, from the time when women still knew that a headscarf was more than fashion, that it was protection, privacy, a small sovereignty over one's own head. The scarf is made of thin, colored fabric, red with yellow flowers, and it's been washed so many times that the colors have grown soft, almost delicate. It's spring, the first warm weather after a long winter, and the fields we see are still not green, but in that grey-brown color that looks as if the earth has just woken, as if it's stretching and yawning under the warming sun. The air is still damp, and through the small windows I can smell water. Water everywhere. The train doesn't go fast. It slows, speeds up, stops at small stations where almost no one steps out, where people wait on the platforms, where dogs sleep in the weak sun. The woman opens her basket carefully, with a gentleness as if she were touching a sleeping child. Inside lie onions, long, silvery white onions, of such beauty that I don't know why I didn't notice before how beautiful an onion can be. And also garlic, and small red bottles with something that smells of herbs, of old recipes, of grandmothers. She takes one of the onions out, peels it slowly, and the skins fall away like skin, white and papery and fragile. She puts the skins back in the basket. Nothing is wasted. She does this with a care, as if it were important work, as if she were cooking for a queen, not just for herself and the others who stand on the market waiting. "Do you like onions?" she asks me in German with a heavy accent, so heavy it sounds like someone speaking over stones. And I notice that she says du, not sie, as if she's decided I'm her grandson or a very old friend she hasn't seen in a long time, or that age and politeness are less important than the human warmth she wants to share with me. I say yes, somewhat confused by this kind of immediate kinship she creates with me. She nods, as if I've given the right answer, and I realize that perhaps any answer would be right if it's given with the heart. "I sell everything on the market, in Rzeszów," she says. "Since,
I don't remember how long anymore. 40 years? Perhaps 50? I lose count. She smiles weakly. My mother sold on the market too. Her mother as well. The onions always come from the same field, not far from my village, where I was born. The garlic too. And these oils. She indicates the bottles with care, as if pointing to her own children. They're made by a woman I know, Pani Marta. She makes them, always, since I was small, perhaps since her mother. Time, it mixes together. She looks out the window as she speaks, and I notice her eyes follow the lines of the landscape, as if she knows every field, every tree. The landscape passes by, still grey and brown and sad, but it's a good sadness, like the sadness of bread that's been baked. In autumn, when I was older, perhaps 10 years ago, when my legs didn't want to obey anymore, when I couldn't walk anymore. She laughs quietly, and it's a laugh that knows life is hard. I thought I couldn't go to the market anymore. Too many hours standing, too much heavy lifting, and everyone says, you should sit down now, look after your grandchildren, be done. But, she points at the basket, my husband, Tadeusz, he says, you're happy when you're on the market. It's true. I'm happy when I spread out the onions, when people come and take an onion, when they say, this onion is good. When I see a mother buy an onion to cook for her family, to give her daughter strength. The train slows, and I feel the full force of the brake, the work it takes to slow so much weight. We travel through a village so small it seems to consist of only 5 or 6 houses. Houses with gardens, houses with smoke from the chimney. An old dog sleeps on the track, a Labrador, grey as the weather, and the train honks, loud, and the dog wakes and trots away as if he's lived this moment 1,000 times before. You know, the woman says, and her voice becomes even quieter, even softer, like someone telling a secret. When you do the same work, not every day, but every market day, twice a week, Wednesday and Saturday, for so long, then you don't see the work. You don't see the onions. You see the people. This mother buying her first onion for her new kitchen because she's just married and she doesn't know how to cook, and she searches in my eyes for answers. This lady, older than me, perhaps older, who says she needs garlic because her blood doesn't flow well, and she trusts me to understand. This boy, coming to the market for the first time, asking what garlic is, because he was born in the city, because the city never showed him where things come from. All these faces, 40 years or 50, all these lives that know me, that know I'm there. She pauses. The onion in her hand is now half peeled, and the skins hang like small garments from the white core. She doesn't look at me, but at the onion, as if speaking to it. After the war, not this war, the other war, the one with all the men, with all the blood, the people on the market, they were so sad, all sad. My father didn't come back, many fathers didn't come back. And my mother, she tells me, the onion, it makes tears, but not only from the onion. The onion, it reminds of everything. The onion is the memory. And after that I understand. working with the onions, with the herbs, with what the earth gives. That's not just selling. That's how you ask the people, are you still alive? Are you still cooking? Are you still making food? Do you still cook for someone else? For your children? Yes? Then you're not alone. Then life isn't over.
The train speeds up again, and the wheels work faster, and I hear them singing, a song I don't understand, but that's rhythmic and soothing. The landscape begins to show other colors, a river, brown and wide, flowing parallel to our journey, a forest in the distance, green and mysterious. First green dots in the fields, like someone's splattered green paint. The sun goes down slowly, not dramatically, but thoughtfully, and the light in the compartment turns reddish, becomes warm, becomes orange.
Now I'm too old, the woman says. And it's not complaint, just simply a fact she accepts. She packs the half-peeled onion back into the basket, under the others, carefully, as if touching glass. I can't walk much longer. The legs, they don't want to anymore. But my granddaughter, Anna, she's learning the onions too. She knows the fields where we harvest. She knows the people on the market. Some of them are her friends, girls she knew from school, and so... The woman leans her head against the window, the glass warm from the setting sun. The onions go on. The people go on. Life goes on. And that is enough. That's all that's needed.
The train draws near Rzeszów, and I see lights on the horizon, small at first, then larger, then suddenly everywhere. In a few minutes, she'll stand up and take the basket and go to the market, perhaps for the last time this week, or perhaps the first, I don't know. And that doesn't matter either. But now she just sits there, her hands in her lap, the scarf around her hair, the headscarf she's worn her whole life, and looks out the window at the darkening landscape. And I think, there are people who feed the world with onions, simply, patiently, 40 years, 50 years, and in the end, they don't understand they're extraordinary. They just think, I'm happy on the market. People come to me. They take the onions, take the herbs. They eat. They go on living. And that's why I come back tomorrow. The lights of Rzeszów begin to shine through the window, golden and friendly. And my eyes grow heavy. And I still smell the garlic and the onions. Warm. Home warm. The kind of warmth that means family, that means grandmother. And I think of a granddaughter, Anna, learning to sell onions, like her grandmother, and all the generations of market women before her, their hands over the onions, their patience over the years, their love over the faces of people, and how that love will go on, from body to body, from hand to hand, as long as the earth gives onions. I met the cheesemaker on a train through the Alps, between Innsbruck and Garmisch. It was high summer, and warm currents of air came through the window, smelling of hay and height, that dry, spicy scent that only forms on these slopes during this time of year. The man sat across from me, perhaps 60, 65 years old, and his hands were... Yes, his hands bore the mark of a life I could read at once. Not rough, not hard, but rather shaped, gently carved by decades, as if time and work had engraved themselves into him like an artist's chisel. The lines on the back of his hands told their own story. Each crease a summer in the heights, each scar a year of patient work with milk and cheese. His eyes were blue-green, like meltwater from mountain streams, clear and deep all at once. On the table before him lay a small wheel of cheese, wrapped in paper, carefully bound with string like a precious gift. Beside it lay an old knife, its handle dark wood, worn smooth from decades of loving use, the blade still sharp as the first day, because this man understood his tools, respected them, tended them like a friend. We spoke at first of nothing special. The train clattered, ta-dum, 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 and outside, higher and higher mountains slipped past, their peaks sharp against the steel blue sky, snowfields glittering in the heights, though it was summer. The windows of the train were open, and the air grew colder as we climbed, sharper, purer, filled with that scent of alpine meadows and distant heights. I asked him what he did there in the mountain hut, and he smiled quietly. Not the superficial smile of a stranger, but the deep, inner smile of someone who has made peace with his work, who has reconciled himself with his fate. "I make cheese," he said, "but not quickly. That's the most important. Not quickly." I didn't understand at first what he meant. The words hung in the warm air of the train, while outside the landscape slipped by, while the wheels played their even, hypnotic melody. He saw the confusion in my face, and his gaze came alive, sharper, as if he suddenly became completely present, completely with me. He leaned forward, carefully, his gnarled hands on the table, and began to tell. He'd been up there for 40 years. 4 decades. That's 1,400 summers, you might say. 1,400 mornings when he woke, and the first thing he heard was the ringing of cowbells. Alone in a small hut, on an Alp reachable only on foot or with an old mule, a mule he called Balu, his only friend, his only companion through all those years. The path wasn't easy. 3 hours climbing over stone and grass under ever thinner air, lungs straining, heart racing faster. Every summer, on the same day, he'd climb with his mule, laden with provisions for the months, with tools, with the few things he needed to live. In winter, he'd come down to a small village, always the same room with the same innkeeper, where the villagers knew he was still alive, that he would return, faithful as always. But up there was his real life, he said, his true home, his sacred place. The cows, always 8 or 9, depending on how many survived, how nature decided, came with him in June, gently trotting on the mountain path, their bells tinkling softly in the crystal-clear mountain air, a song that repeated itself every summer. And every night he milked them, every single night for 40 years, no exception, not even when he was ill or tired, a routine so deep in his body as his own heartbeat, his own breathing. The milk became cheese, and the cheese needed time, infinite time, patient, surprisingly patient. For months it lay there, in the cool rooms of the hut, airy, dark, damp like a cave, and he turned it every day, tended it lovingly, like a child he loved, like a child being brought into the world. The man spoke of this process as if of a secret magic, of an alchemical miracle that only he understood. that only a few people in the world still understood. "Some people," he said quietly, his voice sinking to a barely audible whisper, like the rustle of wind over grassland. "They want to produce quickly. They want to make many cheeses, sell many wheels, get rich quickly, become famous quickly. I understand that. I'm not angry with these people. I was young too. I wanted to move ahead quickly. But the milk doesn't understand that. The milk has its own reckoning of time, its own wisdom, older than us humans, older than all our haste. The milk needs time, real time, to truly become cheese. Not 3 weeks, not 3 months. That's still too fast, too hasty, too violent against nature. It takes longer, much longer. Sometimes it needs 6, 8 months, sometimes 9 months, sometimes even longer, until a cheese is truly itself. Until it has gone through all the stages of ripening, all the transformations it needs to become. Until it has become absolute perfection. He opened his old knife with a slow, practiced movement, the blade reflecting the window light, and cut a slice, thin, respectful, lovingly, and offered it to me, reaching it across like a sacrament. The flesh was golden yellow, almost amber, glowing with an inner light, with tiny crystals in it that crunched between the teeth and seemed to sparkle with light, like little diamonds from distant stars, like little worlds, complete in themselves, perfect. "You can taste it," he said, and his eyes grew brighter, more luminous, like fire lit by the moon. "But not just the cheese, not just the acidity and the saltiness and the complex chemistry. You taste the whole summer in it, the entire story. The rain in June, when it hammers against the hut roofs like a drummer, when the whole mountain-top turns to fog. The dry grass in August, bitter and golden and spicy, that the cows eat and that goes into the milk. The cold nights in the heights, when frost comes down from the sky and the air becomes crystalline, when you can almost see your breath. The morning air, when the sun first touches the mountain peaks and everything becomes white, blinding, sacred. The snowfall in October, sudden, early, covering the Alp. Everything, all of it that happened during those months, while I made it, while I collected the milk every evening, every morning, while I warmed it carefully, respectfully, while I waited patiently, year after year. You can't do this quickly. Speed would destroy everything, would rip the soul from the cheese. This requires patience, boundless patience, and time to wait, time to observe, time to understand, and the deep trust that time itself is an important ingredient, perhaps the most important one. Then he sat there and ate his piece of cheese slowly, very slowly, with closed eyes, like reciting a prayer, reverently, with deepest gratitude, as if thankful to the sun, the mountains, the cows, all the patience. He looked out the window at the receding peaks, which slowly, very gradually, grew lower, as the train descended somewhat deeper into the valley, the air growing warmer, thicker, less crystalline. The train moved gently, ta-dum, ta-dum, its steady heartbeat, and the landscape slid past us. Green meadows, small houses with red roofs, roads full of life. People who were in a hurry, who didn't know, couldn't guess how long time needs to make sense. It was funny, paradoxical, bewildering. I'd just listened to him, his words only spoken a few minutes ago, still vivid in my ears, floating in the air between us, and yet only now, in this moment, did I truly understand, deep in my bones, in my heart, in my soul, what he meant. It wasn't about cheese, not about a simple object, not about economics or sales. It was about the deep, universal belief, the spiritual trust, that all things need their time, that we cannot work against nature, that we cannot command nature. That quality cannot be hurried, that beauty requires renunciation, that depth needs time, that you cannot shortcut what you are and what you can become by working faster, producing more, becoming louder, that the best cheese and the best life at all is one that wasn't rushed, that wasn't under pressure, that had time, slowly and quite naturally, from within itself, to truly become, to become authentic. That is the secret, I thought, the deep secret of life itself. The train moved on between gentler hills, downhill now, the speed gently increasing, the wheels growing faster, but still deliberate, still respectful toward the landscape. The sun shone golden on the grass outside, creating long shadows that reflected in the window, sliding past like memories you cannot grasp. The cheesemaker had fallen asleep, his head resting lightly against the warm window, the little knife still held firm in his large, tender hand, as if he wouldn't release it even in his dreams. I sat there and looked at the rest of the cheese that lay before me on the table, golden yellow and crystalline, still glimmering under the soft train light, still marvelous. And it seemed to me that I could truly taste the whole summer in it, all the months, all the days, all the moments of patience, all the nights high in the heights. Slowly, so slowly, like the time this man had lived all those years up high, in silence and solitude, with his cows and his milk, and his unwavering trust in the process. The train clattered on, ta-dum, ta-dum, slower now, more drowsy, as if the train too was growing sleepy, as if the train too understood what patience means, and my eyes grew ever heavier and warmer, as if I myself was becoming cheese, ripening, patient, my soul transforming into something new. The man slept deeply, his breathing calm and peaceful. The cheese lay before me, golden and patient, and everything around me needed only time to ripen, to become, to rest, to transform, slowly, very slowly, in the warmth of the train, in the warmth of memory, in the boundless warmth of patience. On the line from Augsburg to Landsberg, in one of those Bavarian trains, an old man carries a large, flat package into my compartment. He asks if he may sit down, even though the door is already open, even though the seat is empty and inviting, as if the asking itself is part of the work, part of the craftsmanship of being polite, part of the rhythm of a life long built on care. I nod, and he sits with great care by the window, the package across his lap, protecting it as if it were a child. He wears a light work jacket, bleached by sun and time, and on the sleeves, something golden, something copper glimmers everywhere. Small flecks and discolorations like tiny stars. On his hands, too, large, bony hands, with veins that bulge out like roots. I see marks, a kind of discoloration that can't be washed away, that's become permanent, as if the copper lives in the skin. The skin looks like an old map, a map of work. Every line tells a story of heat and tools, every scar a moment of attention or inattention. "Coppersmith," he says simply, before I even ask, as if he knows I'll ask, as if he said it to someone 1,000 times before. 55 years, since I was 19. And now, he gestures to the package with a kind of ceremony. That's my last work, my big finale. I retired yesterday, or was it today? The days blur together. I ask if I may see it. He opens the package with care, not quickly, not carelessly. The copper that appears is polished and gleaming, a large, gently curved cauldron with a surface that looks like water just beginning to flow. A checkerboard pattern of lighter and darker copper tones, finely chiseled. "That's truly wonderful," I say, and I mean it, with all my heart. I'm not someone who uses words lightly, but this object, it's truly beautiful. "Thank you," he says, and he says it without falsehood, simply. 43 hours of work, the last time I've beaten this cauldron with the hammer. The hammer and I, we've worked together. He shows me his right hand. The thumb is thicker than the other, noticeably thicker, and the knuckles are knotted like small stones. The hammer, that's my partner, you see. Not my wife, not my child, my partner. 55 years, every day. We know each other very well, better than people. The train travels through flat Bavarian landscape, gently, without hurry. Augsburg has just passed. I saw the lights, the old buildings, the history. And the villages that come are small, with white churches and red roofs, with beer gardens and gardens. The train's rhythm is slow. This line has no great bends, no bridges that cry out. Everything is quiet. Everything is prepared. What makes a good coppersmith? I ask. It's a question I ask almost automatically, routinely. But as I ask, I notice it's not an automatic question. I really want to know. I want to understand. The smith leans back, and I see his body remember, relax. He looks at the cauldron as if looking at a second person here in the compartment, as if the cauldron were listening to him. "Hearing," he says. "That's the first thing. Not the eyes. Hearing. You must know the sound. The sound of copper when the hammer strikes it. It's like music. When the sound is right, then the copper becomes soft, becomes obedient, becomes warm. When the sound is wrong, then it becomes brittle, becomes angry, becomes cold. It breaks. It protests." "And then?" I press. "Then patience. The smith, he must make the same strike 100 times, the same turn 100 times, the same heat 100 times. And each time it must be exact. Not better, not worse. Exact. Because the nature of copper, it's not about winning or losing, not a question of victory. It's about harmonizing, the understanding between three things: the hammer, the hand, the copper. We must all three think with one force, one rhythm, one soul, so to speak. He leans forward and shows me a particular pattern on the cauldron, and his finger touches it very gently. See, the pattern isn't freely invented. The pattern is in the copper. It was always there, even before I started. The copper, it knows what it wants to be. And my job, my whole job, was just tap until it wakes up. Listen. Respect. Tap. How long did you know that this would be your last work? I asked. The smith shrugs. I didn't know. But after a few years, after perhaps 50 years, the hands, they tell you, the back, the eyes too, they don't want to anymore. And one morning I woke up and I simply knew, this is the last time you're starting this cauldron. This is the end. And so, he looks at his hands with a kind of love. I made it very slowly. 43 hours. Normally, 40 hours, 30 hours. I work quickly, I'm efficient. But this time, I wanted it to be conscious, so that each strike counts, so that I notice, so that I feel. The train slows, and I feel the brake working. A single tree, a birch, stands at a field's edge, white and thin, and the smith looks at it for a long time, as if he wants to learn something from the tree, as if the tree has an answer. You know, he says quietly, when you stop expressing yourself through your craft, then you're a little empty. Not sad, not desperate, not angry, just empty. A space where work was. But you're giving it to someone? I ask. The cauldron? My daughter. She has children. 4. And the children, they'll become, someday, too old for toys, too old for dreams. And perhaps one day, they'll go into their mother's kitchen and they'll see this cauldron, this gleaming copper cauldron, and they'll ask, what is that? And then someone will say, your grandfather made that. And that will mean something. That will show that grandfather wasn't just an old man with large hands, but that he beat something with his hammer, with much noise and much patience and much love. And that will remain. The cauldron will remain long after me. Landsberg approaches slowly. The city's lights grow larger, yellow and warm. The lamps in the compartment are on now. That wasn't necessary, but someone turned them on. And they're too bright, too electric. And the smith slowly packs his cauldron again. Each movement deliberate, each movement a ceremony. Wrapping the cauldron in paper, protecting it, loving it. Thank you, he says to me, even though I've done nothing but listen. Thank you for listening to me. The train slows further, and through the window I see the lights of Landsberg, warm and yellow, like copper itself, as if the smith had made the whole city. And I think of a man who for 55 years has heard copper wake beneath his hammer, has heard material come alive under attention, who learned to make 3 things speak with one voice: the hands, the material, the dream, who understood that craft isn't work, but love,
And now he'll stop. But his last cauldron, it will glimmer long, will shine long from his daughter's window, will stand long in the kitchen. And his grandchildren will ask, "What is that?" And someone will answer, "That was your grandfather. He made that." And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything that's needed.